This is the Black and Gold Review Show, sponsored by your Southern Quality Ford dealers and the Ford F-Series, celebrating 42 years of truck leadership.
It's the East. It's the East. Yeah. It's the whole reason why we It's the whole reason why we That's how we eat. When one wolf eats, all the wolves eat. When one lion eats, all the lions eat. Yeah. When you want to take care of your brother, you got to eat. You eat by making plays. Every throw, every kick, every tackle, every sack. Yeah. That's how we eat. Yeah, let's go eat. Yeah, go eat. Yeah. 6 on 3, 6 on 3, 1, 2, 3.
Time to eat. West Coast trip capped off by a win in Seattle. The Saints will certainly take that every time. Welcome to the Black and Gold Review Show. I'm Juan Kincaid, Saints Hall of Famer Deuce McAllister. Chris Hagan on the end down there. Guys, a successful trip, no doubt about it, for the Black and Gold.
Well, particularly when you wrap it up the way that you did as far as with a victory. I mean, obviously you would love to be 2-0 on that trip, but I thought that they did what they had to do to be able to come away with a victory and at least put themselves in a good position to close out that first quarter of the season.
Yeah, by any means necessary,
Yes.
get a win in Seattle, move forward, and come back from a long time away from home with a victory. I'd say that's pretty good, all things considered, whether you had Drew Brees or not.
You're right. No complaints right now after this game. All right, get right to the headlines. A lot to talk about tonight. Headline number 1, Bridgewater gets the game ball. Teddy Bridgewater starting his first meaningful game since 2015. Did just enough to push the Saints to the win over the Seahawks. Had a shaky start, but got better as the game got longer. Deserves a game ball because he did what the coaches asked him to do.
I think that deservedly so. I mean, you're putting in a tough situation as far as the location and understanding what you have to be up against as far as the team that you're playing. They were 15-0 in September. You know, that team that's a tough place to play. And so for any quarterback to be able to come in there and do what they did, particularly for Teddy, you know, he hadn't started a meaningful game. It's been a while. Yeah. And so for him to have that opportunity, I thought it was a pretty good deal. Yeah,
and I'm sure you compartmentalize it as it just being one game and you take it one game at a time, but Teddy's on a team that has high expectations. When Brees goes down, the expectation is not only do you pick it up, but you win games, because when Brees comes back, you hope this team is in contention to do some things down the road. So he handled that pressure well. He weathered the storm, literally, some rain in Seattle, and had a good game, took care of the football. I think that's what you asked him to do, and I think you got to give him the game ball. I know there were other guys who were deserving, other players, units, but he deserves it.
You also got to see what a full week of practice in the offense, being the guy that's taking all the first steps, the difference it can make.
Yeah, he looked a whole lot more comfortable. I think his timing was a little bit better. He looked comfortable in where he was going with the ball, knowing where he was going with the ball, getting it there. And the offense, I think, responded better to Bridgewater being in the game in terms of him being the leader and shaking off that kind of shell shock feeling it looked like they had against Los Angeles when Brees went down.
I agree with you, and I look, the more he plays, the more comfortable he is going to get in this system, and I think the more he can see some of the mistakes that he's made, and he'll tell you, it was not a perfect game for him. It was not just him going out there and executing at the highest level. I still think that there's a higher level for him to be able to achieve, but it was a good first step for him.
Headline number 2, Alvin Kamara carries the load. The Saints are 8-0 when he touches the ball at least 20 times in the game. On Sunday, he had 25 touches, 161 total offensive yards, a couple of touchdowns. Saints needed all of that from him, but can they continue to ask for that from him?
I think that's a heavy load for Alvin. I think, you know, that sweet spot for him is always going to be in that 15 to 20 range. You know, he gets north of that. My concern becomes the wear and tear on it. And look, he was fantastic yesterday. And, you know, I don't know if the Seahawks actually ever really got a square or a solid shot on him as far as him being a runner. I mean, there were numerous guys, and we're talking about all-pro Bobby Wagner guys that are they're hitting him. Yeah, they're hitting him and they can't bring him down. I mean, so it was really, really something to see.
Yeah, it's like he's, you know, lined in grease. Like they just slip and fall right off him. It's insane to see. But back to what Deuce was saying about the load, I think it is a lot, and I think they're still trying to find that balance. It's kind of similar with Mark Ingram as it is with Latavius Murray. It depends on the type of game that they're playing, how much I think he needs to be on the field. But if you look at these first 3 games, Kamara snaps 143 to Murray's 53. Last year, the first 3 games with Ingram, it was Kamara 108 to 94. When Ingram was available those first 3 games back after suspension. So I think it's a little wide right now. I would expect that to close, especially when the Saints if the Saints find themselves playing with a lead.
I was going to ask both of you guys about the whole Ingram factor last year. He had to sit out, obviously, because of suspension. So it seemed to me that maybe Peyton got a pretty good gauge of how he could use Kamara last year on into this year, as far as number of touches he gets, how many carries, what his body can take wear and tear.
Well, I think they always have felt, as far as have a magic number, but you want to win the game. So if he's the hot guy, you're going to feed him the ball. You want to win the game. But the question becomes, I want him available in January and late December. Not so much to say that we just gave him a lot of touches early on in September, where some of that you can maybe pull off. And I think that they will get to that point where they do get Murray a little bit more involved. And I think that was one of the things that Sean kind of hinted to as well. If he had it back, he would maybe call a different play or maybe a different formation over. But right now, they had a nice mix, and they were able to, obviously come away with the victory, and that was the most important thing.
I think it very much is a flow of the game thing. One of my favorite examples, the Falcons game, the first time against the Falcons last year, when it was a back-and-forth game of who's going to have the ball last, but you have to score on every possession because neither of these defenses is stopping anything. That's when Kamara hit a career high in terms of touches because they needed to score on every possession. I think yesterday it wasn't the same type of game, but it was a game where you felt like Russell Wilson could make something happen. Yes. So you wanted all your possessions to count, every shot to do something magic with Kamara and get points. You needed it because you knew Russell and the Seahawks were going to make a push, and they did.
And they did. You're right. Headline number 3, special teams sets up success. Teddy Bridgewater said life was made better and a bit easier early thanks to that first touchdown by special teams. A punt return by Devontae Harris and the precision punting by Thomas Morstead all game long. Special teams had a really special day, and they'll need to have more games like this going forward for this team to be successful.
Well, you may not get a return every game, but if they can flip the field like they did from a punt return as well as a kickoff return standpoint, look, if the offense is working only maybe 60 or 40 yards, you like that as an offense. I mean, because you're really literally talking about 3 first downs, and you're in Will Lutz's territory as far as field goal. You always want to convert it to touchdowns, but if you can have maybe only 50 yards or 60 yards for an offense to go, and that means they get a touchdown, you love it. And then when you talk about Harris, look, the touchdown, phenomenal, not only from he but the guys that were blocking for him. The one thing that, and he'll continue to get better, he's got to look that punt in. That's the one thing that scares you, the one that he that was a muff or he fumbled. He took his eyes off of it just a little bit. It caught him on the hands, right on the edge. He looks that one in, and it's a clean game from he. And they were just fantastic as far as the coverage unit as well as the return guys.
It's a lot easier to learn and bounce back from the mistakes when it's a win versus something that costs you in a loss. On the flip side of what Deuce was talking about with the offense, defensively, when you're facing a guy like Russell Wilson who buys so much time, who makes it so hard for your defensive backs to cover down the field, those explosive plays may come a little bit more often. We saw a couple of them, but when they've got to drive the field 90 yards or 95 yards versus driving the field 70, 60 yards, makes a huge difference in terms of keeping them from even getting field goals.
Okay, headline number 4, defense picks their spots, put the final score aside, though. For much of the game, the Saints defense had itself a heck of a day, giving up just 7 points until the fourth quarter rolled around. Demario Davis said they knew the Seahawks wanted to punish them with the run, to soften things up with the pass, but the Saints seemed to be ready for everything they wanted to do early on.
Outside of, I think it was 2 runs, actually the run that Carson fumbled on, and the Russell Wilson, the first scramble, I think, where he got 18 yards. This was a really, really good job as far as run defense was concerned, whether it was Kiko Alonso, whether it was Demario Davis, whether it was A.J. Klein as far as the backers were concerned. All of those guys, they were filling the gaps. They were hitting them inside. Malcolm Brown did a nice job. David Onyemata did a really nice job. And they were able, the defensive ends, Davenport, Hendrickson, and Cam Jordan, they were able to set the edge. And so those guys were really able to run the football. I thought it was a really good job, total unit effort as far as stopping the run.
They also caught a couple of breaks. I mean, those Chris Carson slips in the backfield, you would think a team like Seattle is used to playing in that would be a little bit more prepared. It didn't seem like he had the right cleat wear, and it kept happening a couple times. It got a couple of everybody. 3 times? Yeah, and then you look at the fumble, and I think Seattle's decision, well, first of all, not having Rashad Penny there to come in and be another hard runner in that situation where Carson is being, I guess, punished for that fumble. But when they took Carson out, you're not afraid of C.J. Prosise as a runner. I'll let him catch little passes in the flat all day and make the tackle. I think Seattle hurt themselves a little bit in what they love to do, and that's run the football by taking Carson out. I know he's a liability, but looking on Twitter and seeing how Seattle fans and media were reacting, they're 50-50 on the fumbling versus keeping your best finisher in the game.
Okay, headline number 5, quickly through this, and Peyton's perfect approach. The play caller was on full display on Sunday, but guys, do you think he was a little more conservative than he would have liked to have been?
Well, I think not only just because of the situation, but I think it was the weather played a part of it as well. I mean, it was a constant rain, and so maybe if you don't have that, he maybe takes a few more shots down the field to soften that back end of that defense up. I mean, but outside of that, yes, I would have loved more run plays to have occurred, but outside of that, I thought he did a pretty good job of calling that game to at least put him in position to be able to score. I mean, they had their longest drive yesterday of the season. It was 7 minutes and 16 seconds, and that was the first drive of the third quarter. So I thought it was a pretty good call game at times. What hurt him, holding, false starts, and that's on the guys.
But when they weren't put in those situations, like you said, I think that's a game you call similarly to minimize risk, even if Breeze is playing. It's not like we haven't seen this team script, opening drives where it's, Ingram short pass, Kamara run, Kamara short pass, etc. down the field. They're used to getting the backs involved, and I think that's perfect for getting Teddy comfortable.
All right, coming up, are we expecting too much too soon from free agent pickups Jared Cook and Latavius Murray? And should the Saints be looking for an upgrade at cornerback? We know a good player that's available, but he comes with an asterisk. Stay with us. Be sure to subscribe to the Fox 8 Overtime podcast for more Saints analysis on demand. You can find our podcast on fox8live.com, the Final Play app, and wherever you listen to your podcast.
You're watching the Black and Gold Review Show, sponsored by your Southern Quality Ford dealers and the Ford F-Series, celebrating 42 years of truck leadership.
All right, welcome back into the Black and Gold Review. Time now to dig into our mailbag submitted on the Final Play app using the Final Word feature. And our first question comes from Blake Williams. He wants to know, why aren't the Saints using Latavius Murray and Jared Cook more? We know what Kamara and Thomas can do. Isn't it time these other supposed weapons step up? First, talking about Murray, two touches on Sunday, not used nearly as much as we thought he would early on this season, but we think the time will come for him, right?
Well, I definitely think his time will come. I think part of the problem is, you trying to win a game as well. I know that you want to work some of those new pieces into the fold of what you're doing, but at the same time, you want to be successful and win a game. And I think that the penalties, the false starts, the holdings have hurt them as well. I mean, because there have been opportunities for, more offensive plays, but when you're first and 20, first and 25, that's hard.
Yeah, it's definitely a hot hand situation, and the game that Kamara was having, and I think there are so many different calls and different things you can do with Kamara, and in terms of Murray, he's more of the downhill runner. I guess a little bit, I don't know if limited's the right word there, but Kamara's just a little bit more versatile, and so I think he's a guy that you rather have on the field in must-win situations. And I think, like Deuce said, Murray's time is coming. There are going to be teams that are weaker against the run, weaker front sevens, where I think he plays a little bit more.
On the other side of it, you've got Jared Cook, the tight end. We expected big things from this guy straight out of training camp because he looked so good with his connection with Drew Brees, but we haven't quite seen it yet. What he's remembered for mostly right now is the catch and fumble in the Rams game.
Well, yeah, and that wasn't even a clean catch on that. It was a big hit.
Yeah.
Eric
Weddle.
Eric Weddle caught him just as he was catching that football, and I still think that he can be a weapon. I know that everyone is looking at that back shoulder.
That was a perfect throw, and that was just timing.
It needs to be higher, though.
Yeah.
I mean, because you're talking about it, you're expecting that, you're coming, you're twisting. That's a low catch to be able to make, particularly in that weather. If that's a little higher, he makes it. He's able to run. But that's a task on time deal. That's where if they get that more throws, more repetitions with that throw, I think that's one that they'll be able to exploit a little bit more.
That would probably be my thing. Is I think we saw the connection happen really quickly with Drew Brees in training camp, and that's what I would expect to translate over. I think there will be times. Again, I think weather played a really significant factor in Seattle, where you do try and push the ball down the field to Cook a little bit more because he is that big target and he's going to have a chance to have some really good matchups. I just don't think yesterday was the game for it.
Okay. All right, so to come, more from our B&G review mailbag, including a question concerning the need for a player that some might call a talented yet controversial pickup. And later, we'll begin to pick apart the Saints' next opponent, the undefeated Dallas Cowboys, coming to the Dome.
You're watching the Black and Gold Review Show, sponsored by your Southern Quality Ford dealers and the Ford F-Series, celebrating 42 years of truck leadership.
The Saints haven't had the greatest secondary play, particularly on the corners, and that's led to a question from our mailbag. This one coming from Leroy. He wants to know, can the Saints please get Jalen Ramsey and get rid of Eli Apple, who I thought had a pretty decent game on Sunday?
Leroy, yes. They can get Jalen Ramsey, but it will come at a high price as far as 2 first-rounders, as well as paying him elite corner money. He wants to be the highest paid cornerback in the league, and I just don't think that is something that is something that the Saints will do right now. I just don't see them doing that and making that move. Yeah,
it's a problem that kind of compounds on each other as well, because not only do you give up the first-round picks, but you're giving up paying guys that are first-round picks that you would pay $5, $6, $7 million a year to not having that cheap, good quality talent that you can plug and play. Instead, having one player for that price. And not only that, but I don't think Apple is as bad as guys make it out to be. Look, corner is a position that is as exposed as any on a football field. There are a lot of plays where you don't say his name. The few that you do, it's probably not something good, but it happens less than you think. It just feels that way. So give the man credit for the Peanut Tillman punch yesterday.
Is the answer that Sean Payton recognizes guys just have to play better on the corners, or is that maybe going outside the house and finding somebody to bring in, or is Ken Crawley possibly the answer, who was inactive on Sunday?
Well, the thing is, they can't give up the explosive plays. That's what it is. It's explosive plays. It's the plus 20, plus 25 type plays. Those are the plays that you want to limit, regardless who is at corner. And so, that's something that they're going to continue to harp on. We saw it kind of last year, and then they were able to limit it as far as those big plays, and they started, just making plays as far as the secondary is concerned. And so if they can limit those explosive plays as far as whether it's the corners, the nickels, or even the safeties, that's what you really want.
Our next question comes from Chico Bailey. What's the timetable on Sheldon Rankins, Chris?
Well, hopefully it's soon. I think it would be nice to have him for Dallas. I don't know if that happens, but certainly with the schedule coming up and the fact that Bridgewater's in, when you're looking at Jaguars, Bears, Bucks, somebody I'm forgetting in there, I think those are teams that you can win with really solid defensive play, and Teddy Bridgewater managing and maybe doing a little bit more than he did on Sunday against Seattle. So the sooner you get him back, the better, because he adds a pass rush factor to a pass rush that's been pretty good so far this season.
Yeah, Arizona is one of the other teams that you play as well. And, he's been practicing, obviously, throughout the season as far as since they took him off the PUP. I figure sometime within the next 2 weeks, you'll probably see Rankins ramp it up even more and to see if he can actually go as far as the game is concerned. They have a tremendous amount of depth right now on that defensive line, so they don't have to really push him as far as to get him to be up and active right now. So it's going to be a situation where they know 100% that he's ready to go, and his workload will probably be around 25, 30 type plays as they try to get him back into football shape.
All right, coming up for the 4th straight week, the Saints will have a chance to hand their opposition their first loss of the season. We'll peek ahead to the undefeated Cowboys next.
You're watching the Black and Gold Review Show, sponsored by your Southern Quality Ford dealers and the Ford F-Series, celebrating 42 years of truck leadership.
The Saints' brutal first quarter of the season will come to a close with the Cowboys coming to the Dome Sunday night. The boys have looked good in winning all 3 of their games to open the season. Dak, Ezekiel, and Amari have been hard to stop. Now, granted, they played the Giants, Washington, and Miami, 3 teams that started out slow and out of the blocks. Are the Cowboys as good as their 3-0 record would suggest they are, though?
The Cowboys are a good team, and they've just beat the opponent that they had to play in. So obviously, I don't know how much you think of those opponents, the Giants, the Redskins, and Miami, but the Cowboys have a good offense, they have a good defense, and special teams looks to be solid. So the Saints have to find kind of a chink in that armor as far as this team is concerned, because this will be an interesting and a physical matchup as well.
Yeah, I would have said regardless of whether the opponents they played in the first 3 weeks were good or bad, if they're 3-0 right now, and knowing the personnel Dallas has, you've had more time for Dak and Cooper, who clicked right away last year, but another offseason and more time for them to work. You add a guy like Tony Pollard, who's been pretty good when used to spell Zeke. And you mentioned their linebackers and their defense. They're one of the few teams that I think has the speed to match up really well with a guy like Kamara and take him out of the game like they did last year in Dallas. They're a tough matchup.
This will be the third time in 4 weeks where the Saints have faced a quarterback that's pretty mobile. Dak this time, obviously Russell last week, and then Deshaun Watson in week 1. Do they treat Dak the same way they treated those other two quarterbacks previously?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think that even more so, Dallas uses Dak as a runner. I mean, there will be design run plays that he wants to be able to do. And so for me, you have to keep him in the pocket and make him a passer. You know, he has the ability to be able to be a scrambler. I don't think he's as quick as Russell Wilson, but I think obviously he's a thicker player, so you've got to bring it as well when you talk about trying to bring him down.
Be sure to keep it locked on Fox 8 all fall long. We've got your football fix with all of our shows, continuing Tuesday night with our Roundtable Sports Chit Chat. We call it Fox 8 Overtime. Wednesdays are reserved for game plan as we get you ready for the next game against Cowboys. Thursday night, week 4 of the regular season kicks off on Fox 8, Eagles and Packers. And on Friday, reserved for the high school kids, Fox 8 Football Friday. Until then, for Deuce and Chris and everyone here at Fox 8, thanks for watching. Our next newscast at 4:30 in the morning. Have a good night.
This has been the Black and Gold Review Show, sponsored by your Southern Quality Ford dealers and the Ford F-Series.